So good morning, everybody. Once again, for those who didn't hear, which is probably everybody, my name is Andrew Bazan here with Simplex Group. This morning, we have a very special guest, one of, I think, the leading voices in the industry when it comes to data and what's going on, what to project and what forecasting in our industry looks like. Dean Croke from DAT's Freight and Analytics. Good morning, Dean. How are you?
Yeah, good to be with you.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank
We're
you.
excited to have you.
Yep.
Before we get started, and I mentioned this already, but I would like everybody here to kind of understand just like how great you are. You don't only just see it from the data perspective and the analytics that you work with, which you're clearly very good at, but you yourself have logged 2 million miles behind the wheel of a truck,
Yep.
particularly in Australia.
Yep.
So that I think just talks to authority. And my understanding is you still hold your CDL, correct?
I do. And still own a 379 Peterbilt show truck that we took to Matt's this year where we met. So
Yep.
yeah, I'm a trucker at heart. So I've seen the industry from all facets from the seat of the truck, whether it be spending, 10 hours on a dock trying to get loaded to overnight express freight to air freight to hauling cattle. So I've done a lot of things in Australia, hauled freight on multi-trailer road trains as we've got down under. And so I know what it feels like to be a trucker and experience all the highs and lows. But in the last 26 years since we moved here, I've spent most of that time on the data analytics side. So trying to find ways to help carriers be better, be safer, be more profitable. So, and that's
Amazing.
I think it's easy to do because if you know how trucking works, then finding data points to support that is a logical conclusion. Whereas a lot of people that do data analytics find it very hard to study the trucking industry because they don't know how the trucking industry is connected. And whilst it's a fragmented industry, it is all interconnected. So I spend a lot of time building what I call jigsaw puzzles, which is building, finding little bits of data that are like a piece of a puzzle and putting all the pieces together to get a picture. And
Yeah.
that's sort of what I do each week with DAT on the freight side of the business.
Yes. For everyone here, Dean does have a show every Monday. Totally worth catching. I know for us on our end, when we watch that show, it's obviously very helpful because, as you know, every week changes.
Mhm.
So one week it looks like we're doing really well, and then the
Right.
next it's panic.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly helpful to look at it from week by week. And so that kind of leads us right into talking a little bit about what went on in Q1.
Right.
So I know we're towards the end of April, but let's do a very quick recap of Q1, and I think that could probably be done in a headline. And I don't know if you agree with it or not, Dean, but the headline here is January and February looked really good,
Mm.
and then March happened, and and it kind of went from there. And so,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, one of the things that we kind of thought about was like, well, how would you sum Q1? And we thought, well, maybe it's like one theme that has two sub themes, and you know, it's a supply side tightening, right? And so
Yeah.
that was one thing that for us was supply side tightening. That's strange. That doesn't sound right, right? We saw that rates didn't necessarily improve because it was the freight volume. People weren't all of
Right.
a sudden getting a
Right.
ton more loads.
Right.
It just
Right.
happened to be that there was some sort of tightening happening on the supply side. And
Yeah.
perhaps underneath that bullet point, you have the two others as the supply side tightening happened because fuel prices started to change, right? Because of
Right.
geopolitical issues.
Mm.
And so that started to squeeze some folks. And we were talking about it a little earlier before logging on, mostly the smaller carriers, right?
Yep.
Because as a quick anecdote, I was talking to a carrier who's a little larger, right? Has a couple hundred trucks, and he himself was like, "Well, March was a fantastic month for me,"
Right.
which makes sense, right? But then for the smaller carriers, when you talk to the one truck
Mm.
sole owner operator, whom I did, she herself was like, "Man, fuel can't go any higher; it's going to put me out of business." And so
Right.
fuel was more less about, it's squeezing my margins to, oh man, is it really going to put me out of this industry? And then lastly, I think
Right.
one of the bigger themes in Q1 was enforcement showed up.
Yep.
Simplex was at two pretty big conferences this Q1, which was the TCA Truckload and
Mm,
MAX.
mm,
And at both, Chief Derek Bars was there, and they, him and alongside his colleagues were very, very. Maybe nobody will get this Taylor Swift reference, but it seems the FMCSA is in their enforcement era, right? So they were very much talking about how, hey, we're taking CDL mills very seriously, the non-CDL non-domicile CDLs, the ELD fraud. I mean, we were shocked to learn about how many ELDs they've been revoked year to date, how many they have refused to
mm,
approve. And then in March alone, we're based here in Miami. In Florida alone, the high Operation Highway Shield that just took
mm,
place, that
mm.
within itself took out a lot
Yep.
of truck. I want to say it was like, I think I have the numbers here. It was about 154 drivers out of service for language deficiencies,
Yep.
176 total out of
Yep.
service, 42 immigration. I think they may have been sent over to ICE or
Nice.
immigration, right?
Yeah.
And so what does all of this tell us for Q1? It's folks are seeing the rates improve, and DAT says it too, right? The spot
Mm,
rates are there,
yeah.
but it's mostly because of the supply side, right?
Yeah. So it's the first time I think we've ever seen this where supply is doing what demand won't, certainly yet. So we don't need demand to increase. We just need trucks not to be there. And that's what's happening right now. We've got fewer trucks, available capacity to haul essentially the same number of loads as last year. So when you've got less capacity and flat demand, rates will go up. Now, if we start to see demand improve, then this is a whole nother discussion where we'll see Q2 start to take off. But I think if you had to summarize Q1, it would be that in what's typically the slowest quarter of the year, we saw rates start to rise year over year, initially caused by weather, like
Mm,
cold weather, freezing cold weather, which almost always happens. So we weren't surprised by that. But at the same time, we had this intersection of thinning capacity because the capacity base is structurally thinner, years of attrition because it was a multi-year freight recession. Carriers were exiting. And of course, all the regulatory headwinds that carriers have been facing around English language proficiency and non-domicile CDL, ELD firmware upgrades that are questionable at best. So there's been a lot of things. And of course, the CDL school's been taken out of business. Derek Barr said that they'd taken about 7,000 of the 32,000 out of the business. And then, of course, you've got all the other legislation that's in the works at a state and federal level trying to tighten up the carrier standard side of the industry. So you had like a perfect storm in a way. You had demand was holding. It wasn't, we didn't see demand destruction. We actually saw the economy improving with in the domestic manufacturing front. So things were looking really good January, February. Cold weather was doing its usual thing, putting a floor under spot rates, driving up reefer rates because dry van shippers were looking for reefers to keep things from freezing. So you saw a
mm,
rate lift there. Winter Storm Fern really did a number on the produce season in Florida, and we should talk about that a little bit more. So you,
yeah.
you get into January, February, and things are looking up, and then of course we have the Middle East war breakout, and then you've got diesel prices surging up 27% since the war started. They're still up about $1.20 a mile since February the 27th. But coming down, I noticed this morning they're going back up again. So they dropped about 27 cents a gallon last week, but they're starting to come back up again because oil is going back up again. And oil explains about 80% of the price of diesel movement. So Q1 was again another roller coaster for us. Andrew, it was the same as last year. I don't know if you remember, last year we had December, January, February, and March were actually showing really positive demand growth signals. And then
Mhm.
Liberation Day hit and the whole market tanked.
Yes.
And then we saw a whole year of people on pause, whether it be manufacturing or consumer purchases. Like we just saw a very flat freight market and rates sort of flattish to maybe down slightly. And then we get to November and we have 3 weeks of storms after Thanksgiving and the market takes off. And
Yep.
it hasn't looked back since. But
Yep.
but the real reason is because there is a structural removal of trucks from the highways because of what the government's doing on the regulatory side. That's the main reason. that spot rates are holding about 25% higher year over year. So it brings us sort of to the end of Q1 where the carriers that have been getting spot rates on the all-in truckload rate side have been squeezed because
Mhm.
they haven't been able to get the full fuel surcharge recapture because it's not a one-to-one pass-through on the spot market, unlike the contract market where it's added onto the rate per mile. On the spot market, it's an all-in rate. So you've really got to know your costs to know whether you're getting enough fuel.
And I think you had mentioned, particularly at Matt's, that only about 50% of that fuel charge is getting passed on. Is that right?
Yeah, so they've only been able to capture about 50% of the rise in diesel prices and the fuel surcharge, which is at about 69 cents a mile today. So when you look at the underlying base rate of the line haul rate, which excludes fuel, and then you look at where the average rates sit for what carriers are agreeing to haul loads at, it's not where all in rates are, which is line haul rate plus the whole 69 cents a mile. It's nowhere near that. So that's how we estimate that carriers have not been getting the full fuel surcharge. And that's sort of anecdotally backed up by people you and I talk to every week.
Yeah.
Rates are starting to slide off a little bit now. So they went up and now they're starting to come back a bit. So I think the market's reached that point where carriers have figured out they can get by with the rate structure they're getting relative to demand. But I think the really good thing, though, for everyone listening is that spring volumes are starting to really make a difference this year. And because it's building season, construction season, planting season, nursery season, the ground's thawing, people are digging holes, they're building things, we've got produce coming online. So we're starting to see as the higher volumes come in through April, and then you've got less trucks. You've still got trucks leaving the market, and you
Yep.
mentioned the 4-day blitz in Florida.
Yes.
That's a warning sign for everybody about what's about to happen in May. So what we're seeing for the first time ever is a market inflection, as in the market's going to flip because the market has reached an inflection point, not because there's more demand for loads on the back of trucks, simply because there's less trucks around to haul what's out there.
Yep.
Now, you add to that a little bit more demand through spring and summer. I think this year looks pretty good.
So I'm happy you kind of let's talk into that, right?
Yeah.
About Q2.
Yeah.
And we're in Miami, so we got to ask, right? I think statistically almost 90% of Mother's Day florals come in through Miami, right?
They do. They land
Uh,
there.
yeah, yeah. So, but that same Mother's Day, right, which normally would be great, Road Check Week is happening.
Mm,
So we have Road Check Week, we've got Mother's Day, we just had this 4-day blitz that
mm.
even post, I want to say in early April, they mentioned that it wasn't just it wasn't just a blitz, it was going to continue. These sorts of enforcements were going to continue.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so
I think Road Check Week is just a calendar entry. I
oh
think
yeah,
it's happening now. Like
oh yeah,
it's,
right,
it's
like
everywhere.
pre-road check.
I
Yeah.
got I got pulled in on 84 near Scranton on the way
Did
to
you?
Matt's. Yeah, I got pulled in, had to show my the title of ownership. It was a full-on inspection at a
Oh,
rest area in Scranton, New York. So they're out there already. I think Road Check Week it could even be less of a focus because there's been more of a focus already
yeah.
across the country.
And so what does that mean for those coming into Florida, coming out? Do we want trucks in Florida, or is this going to push reefer rates much higher because of this
I
particular?
think it's already started. I think it'll send reefer rates through the roof. At the start of the year, I made a statement on our IQ show, and I said there'll be four things that could happen this year that will underpin the extent of chameleon carriers, non-domicile CDL
Mm.
drivers, English language proficiency, anybody that's sort of got questionable, ghost fleets, people operating illegally. If there was any truth to the numbers being talked about, we would see it in four areas. Uh, Avocados ahead of Super Bowl, strawberry season in Lakeland, Valentine's Day, and then Mother's Day. And those first three came to fruition. Uh,
Yeah.
but Mother's Day, we're about to see something that I don't think we've ever seen before because of the focus. So here's the thing, Andrew. The focus on minority truckers disproportionately affects immigrant truckers
Hmm.
in the produce sector, especially California teams. So California's had a lot of focus. A lot of our produce comes from California each year over the summer. Outbound Salinas, where lettuce has just moved back from Yuma, Arizona, back to Salinas, which is the summer salad bowl of the United States. It's where a lot of our iceberg and romaine lettuce comes from. All of our strawberries
Mm.
come from there in the summer. Those rates outbound Salinas to the East Coast are up 45 to 50% year over year already. And we haven't even seen volumes start to move. So again, a lot of those
And Florida
folks,
has kind of dropped, correct?
well,
Not to cut you off, but it's almost California produce, from my understanding, has kind of overtaken a little bit. Not overtaken, maybe that's a strong word. Florida's produce.
Florida's tanked product because
Yeah.
Winter Storm Fern decimated a lot of the crops. If you look at tomatoes down 26% year over year, strawberries down 32%, cabbage down 26%,
Oh, wow.
corn down 66%. So Winter Storm Fern really did a number on the produce season outbound California. So if you say, okay, well, if volumes are down and there's fewer truckloads, then that would probably suggest that rates are down. Well, no, because of that enforcement action you spoke about. Remember, every scale house in Florida was turned into an immigration enforcement center back in September,
Yep.
and there's only a few roads in and out of out of Florida, right? So
That's
it's
right.
pretty hard to hide. And
Yep.
so I think that's why I said berry season out of Lakeland was going to be a tell, and it has been to a degree. And Valentine's Day saw a spike in rates, and I think we're about to see Mother's Day dwarfs Valentine's Day in terms of the volume of flowers from Colombia and Ecuador. You're going to see 35 to 40 jumbos a day landing in Miami with flowers, 70 to 100 tons apiece. And it's going to drop a lot of volume in there starting next Monday. Is when you look at the USDA volumes of when floral shipments land, it starts 2 weeks before Valentine's Day.
Hmm.
We will see spot rates typically spike by the end of next week outbound Miami. Because if 90% of your flowers come into Miami, they've got to go all over the country and they're mostly teams. If they're not in the contract market. The large contract carriers have already got 10% surcharge added to all the loads as of tomorrow. That starts tomorrow. It's
Oh,
20%.
wow.
Yeah, it's a 20% surcharge outbound California. So if I could, and I could just give you the numbers. The USDA numbers came out this morning, and it's extraordinary what's going on out of Florida. So if you think, okay, so volumes are down 58% year over year outbound
I
Florida.
saw that stat. Yep. I saw
But
that statistic.
Atlanta reefer rates for produce as of this morning up 42% at 1600 to 1800 a load.
Wow.
Chicago up 25%, Philly up 23, Baltimore up 17%, New York up 14%. On our load board, load posts are up 34% in the last week for trucks
Wow.
to New York outbound. Rates are up 24% for all temps, all commodity zones. So Florida on lower volumes last week saw a real tightening in produce capacity, like for fruit and veg loads
Hmm.
specifically. So when rates go like that on lower volumes, that tells you there's a structural reduction in capacity, reefer carriers. So now let's get into Mother's Day flower shipments, and suddenly they've conducted a blitz, a 4 day blitz across the highways.
Yep.
I think I think a lot of carriers are going to be very worried about going to Florida, deep into Florida. And here's why, Andrew. Like, so if you think about on our load board, we look at road check week and the delta week to week of equipment posts because carriers posting their equipment on our load board looking for loads is a measure of capacity.
Hmm.
It tells you how much capacity is out there. If capacity is loose, we see more trucks looking for loads on our load board. They'll
Yep.
post their truck and say, I need a load. Well, when capacity is tight, you have fewer equipment posts. During road check week, we typically see a 10 to 12% drop in equipment posts as carriers take time off.
Is there a
Reefer,
specific type? Is it tends to be reefers?
it's so the 10 to 12 reefer rates are double dry van and flatbed.
Mm.
And the reason is mostly because of the 150-mile ag haulers exemption and lack of paperwork that you need in the cab to explain why you've used it.
Oh.
Right. Now, here's the other thing. The focus of the FMCSA on ELDs this year and the removal of some ELD vendors the week before, there's a cutoff date the week before where they're being tossed out. The carriers then are on paper logs until they get a new ELD provider. Again, another reason not to be out there. So I think you're about to see RoadCheck Week send spot rates skyrocketing like we've never seen before, simply because of the structural removal of capacity from the market, the focus on what we call jailbroke ELDs, which have been, where they allow carriers to reset their hours every
Modify
morning.
it. Yep.
Yep. All the focus on immigration, anybody that's not squeaky clean. And then you've got on top of that the surge in volumes. Florida's about to see something that I don't know that we've seen before in our rates, and today's USDA rates kind of confirm. My headline on my LinkedIn post today was it's a warning sign of what's about to come for brokers and shippers. And I think any carrier that's wants to go deep into Florida, I think the rate structure will be very favorable in the next couple of weeks.
And do we see, I know that we've noticed the spot rates, increasing in
Yep.
some dry vans and all that. How do contract rates look?
So contract rates are starting to come into routing guides slightly up, which is great news. So they've been flat. If I look at new rate development, we call it on our contract side. So just for those listening, DAT's got about 150 billion in freight spend that we see each year. It's about a third of the truckload market. 100 billion is spot, 50 billion is contract. So give you an idea of how they mix. So we
Wow.
see a decent chunk of the contract freight market.
Yep.
Those rates coming into routing guides in the dry van market were up 4% in the last few weeks. So so the rates they're replacing from last year are up 4%. In reefer, they're up 7%. Now, what's important there, Andrew, is for the last 12 months, new rates based on bids by brokers and carriers with shippers have been only up 0.5% in the last year,
Oh, wow.
but they were down 1% over 2 years. So the market has been struggling to get contract rates up, which represents about 80% of the loads moved. It's only in the last month that contract rates are starting to rise, which tells you that carriers have reduced their contract fleet size enough where they can start to now get rates up because in supply demand terms, there's more loads than trucks.
Hmm.
But for the last 3 years, we've had more trucks than loads.
Yep.
So
No,
the
absolutely.
pendulum's swinging, the market is resetting, and I think shippers are very much concerned about routing guide failure, which is carriers unable to haul loads at the rates they agreed to, which is
Yep.
where your tender acceptance starts to suffer. And so I think this is a really interesting time. But again, Andrew, not because there's more demand, it's just there's
Right.
fewer trucks. So it's a fascinating story.
No, no, it really is. And it kind of leads us into the indicators. What should the carriers be tracking for the next 60 or so days? I know DAT has their rate cast,
Yep.
which I apologize for not knowing the numbers off of my head, but I believe reefer is being positioned to have huge growth over the next 30 days or something. Or is it dry van?
Yeah. No, flatbed.
Flatbed.
Like if you've got a flatbed, I think that's going to be extraordinary. My forecast for the 35 days on flatbed has us in the next month hitting a record high $2.70 a mile, excluding the 88 cents fuel surcharge. So,
Wow.
so if you had 270 plus 88, that's $3.60 a mile all in for flatbed. That's the highest ever we will have recorded, even higher than the pandemic.
Even, I was going to say, even pandemic years, right?
Yeah. So reef is going to be very strong. Don't forget, regionally, um, it's going to be a very strong produce market. I don't know that it'll lift the entire market because produce is very regional and spot and time sensitive, and depends on weather and harvest timing and yields. So, but I think reef is going to be very strong in pockets like Salinas, Fresno, McAllen in Florida. Nogales is very strong, and
Mhm.
then southeast Florida, and then you get into Peaches and that sort of stuff in the southeast. So I think regionally it'll be very strong. Flatbed though is skyrocketing across the board, but again, not because the whole economy is doing well. It's because most of the demand is being driven by commercial construction around data centers and AI and nuclear power and power generation and like natural gas powered Caterpillar diesel generators.
because I did kind of want to briefly talk on that because
Yeah.
I think it was Bob Costello at the
Yep.
ATA who had mentioned that the indicators for housing isn't necessarily high, right? Which normally is what helps out flatbeds.
Oh,
It's now the pardon me, it's now the data centers.
well, so let me sort of explain why you mentioned contract. On the contract market, um, flatbed carriers have been struggling. That, in fact, the replacement rates, they've been dropping their rates for 2 years on the contract side to try
Mm,
and hold volume because the contract side of the market, think dimension framing lumber, roof shingles, drywall,
hmm.
attached to housing. That market's been very flat to down
Yep,
because of the general economy. So contract
absolutely.
rates have been flat and rates have been dropping. In the spot market, rates have been soaring because we're not moving a lot of housing related freight. We're moving a lot of infrastructure, data
Data
centers. Now,
centers.
why is that? Well, data centers are in the middle of nowhere. It's not a contract. They pop up quickly. It's a long deadhead out, and there's cranes and permits. Like so, it's a perfect spot market freight mix, whether it's overdimensional or an in-frame load, in-gauge load. The whole construction of data centers and anything to do with nuclear power and power generation in general has driven incredible demand in the spot market in the last 18 months. And that's probably going to continue for the rest of the year. So you've got a decoupled market is how I would explain it, because normally they work in sync.
Hmm.
Normally spot rates lead contract by 4 to 6 months.
Yep,
Well, that's not necessarily holding now because some commodities are doing well and others aren't. So, you use that ocean analogy, the rising tide lifts all boats. Well, that's
yep,
not the case here. And it's like produce season's a little bit like that. Florida's down, California's starting to come up.
up. Yep.
The whole market's not coming up at the same time. So that's why I say regionally, you've got to be on your toes because you've got to be very selective about where you go to because not every market's behaving the same. So you've got to watch spot rate movement in particular. But again, I think it comes down to if I was in Florida, I'd be reading all the news I could around Mother's Day and flowers and
Yep.
strawberries. Like, if you got to understand the demand for what you haul before you can start talking about rates.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I'm being told we've kind of gone a little bit over, and that's okay. And so I did want to, because I was given a couple of questions here, and
Yep.
so I did want to give a chance to ask. Okay, so and I'm assuming because a large majority of our clientele is it tends to be between small to mid, and so what should small fleets be doing differently right now to stay profitable?
Um, I would be slowing down. That's the first thing. Slow down, like 75 to 65 miles an hour is the same as an 8 cents per mile increase in rates.
Okay.
So slow down. Um, that's the biggest thing. I don't see carriers slowing down a whole lot. Like that, so I'd slow down. The other thing, though, I would make sure that I have all my paperwork in order. Now's the time to have more, not less.
Okay.
Spend time to make sure you've got every bit of documentation and some in the cab of the truck. Make sure all of that's up to date because you're going to get inspected and you need to be doing more, not less. I think
Okay.
that's the big deal. I think the other thing though is that the way to is find broker partners or shipper partners that you can work with, but have the discussion with them now that the market is changing and there are fewer available trucks out there. So I think it's about having the discussion about capacity in the second half of the year and building those relationships and saying, I'll be there for you if we can agree on some good terms. So that's the same whether you're talking to a broker about their private network, because I
Mhm.
think you don't want to be trying to maximize your rate per mile today without thinking about the implications on that, over a 6 month period. Because the market is going to change and people are going to be looking for reliable carriers to move that freight. So partnerships are absolutely critical. I'd be having very solid discussions with all of my partners right now about what lanes, what density, but more importantly, Andrew, the time. Like
Yep.
time is not rate per mile is immaterial if you're going to get held over.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I
So
think your
time.
points of having everything ready so that way time less spent on that inspection, helps
Yes.
you out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that makes all the sense in the world. Dean, thank you so much. I genuinely think that we could probably keep talking about this for a very long time.
We
So
could.
I
Anytime we
should have scheduled longer than 30, but
should do it
perhaps we
again.
can, yeah, perhaps we can have you back for a part 2 at some point. That would be
Anytime.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you. And I apologize. I saw that there were about 4 other questions. There might be an opportunity, Dean, where maybe we can get you to answer and we'll do some sort of blog or a newsletter or something. But thank you everybody for logging on. Dean, for your reference, this will be put on YouTube as well for anybody who wants to come back to it. You had a lot of great insights. And so thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much, Dean.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.